right, everybody. So today on the podcast, we have a roundtable with Alex Bromley and Joey Szatmary. How we doing, guys?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah,
Looking
man.
forward to it.
So Joey, I don't remember the last time we actually podcasted together. It's been a little while now, and we were just going little updates there. And then Alex, I think maybe last year we caught up. And I thought you guys would be cool to get together because obviously you have different backgrounds, but you both have a significant strength background, both very impressive individuals, both in the space. So I thought it'd be a good collab there. So Alex, why don't we start with you for people who don't know you, your background?
Yeah, sure. Most of my experience with like lifting and competing is in strongman. I started in '06 back when it was still this weirdo little underground thing before it really kind of took off. And I've probably done like 50 some shows since then. Um, I don't really have an athletic background, which is probably one of the most interesting, probably points of disparity between me and somebody like Joe. And that's something I've kind of grown to learn and appreciate a lot more and kind of see how that fits into the broader things. As far as training, I mean, I've been like training other people in my, like since I was 19, corporate gyms. I own my own strongman gym in California for a good while out there. And I've had the benefit of like talking to and engaging with just a wide variety of people who are much more accomplished and smarter than I am over the years. So it's given me, I think, pretty good, well-rounded insight into how a lot of this fits together.
Cool, man. How about you, Joey?
Yeah, I mean, just grew up playing sports. That led to college lacrosse. Then after college lacrosse, it was, what do I do now? So CrossFit was pretty trendy at the time. So I got involved with CrossFit, realized I didn't like doing anything longer than probably 5 minutes. So got involved with the Olympic weightlifting side of things. Had a little Olympic weightlifting spurt competitively, and then that segued to strongman. So I started that in probably the end of 2016, and then just competed in shows throughout the years with strongman. Really love the sport. Had a gym for almost 8 years, and then got involved kind of like same thing with Alex. We do YouTube content creation, get to meet a lot of people, which is I think the coolest part, just talking to so many different minds and picking their brains. So I'm by no means an expert, but more just kind of a generalist and just trying to pick and pull different things I like and throw in the melting pot depending on who I'm working with. But then lately I've been working a lot with sports performance. So I've been coaching high school lacrosse for 5 years now, and just with them, I work with some wrestling teams and clubs. Just really enjoy getting to work with the youth, especially with where I'm at in life. So
Very cool,
that's kind
man.
of it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the history there, and Joe, you were actually pretty early in the podcast. I think within the first half a year I started, it was episode 37. We're now at like 250 or so. So to see, progression over the years has been cool. Now, Alex, you had mentioned how you didn't really have the athletic background, whereas Joey it certainly does. But I would guess that, at least from what I've seen, and you guys would know better than I would, I'm not sure about strongman, but certainly powerlifting and bodybuilding. I feel like it was almost the norm to not be an athlete prior. It almost seemed like a lot of the guys, it was almost like this kind of odd thing that people did. And nowadays, I guess, as you get like more and more of these genetic outliers that come in. But at least from like when I was growing up getting into it, it seemed like the powerlifters were the guys who weren't like the football stars, maybe, or things like that, but kind of its own niche. Do you agree with that or not so much?
Yeah, I have a harder time. I don't know, especially now since it's so big and the internet has brought so many people into it. I think it's a little harder to generalize now. But when I started lifting, I want to say I first got like a bodybuilding magazine like 1999, like right around turn of the century. I was a teenager. I sucked at sports. I didn't start playing football until I was like 13. Didn't know what the hell I was doing. Still suck. And that was like kind of my outlet for it was like, okay, if I'm going to eat shit every time we have to run through tires, if I'm going to be the slowest guy, if I'm going to drop every football that gets thrown to me, at least I know I can go to the gym and tangibly improve on this one thing. It's like I have this skill I can zero in on and prove to myself every time I get better. So that was, I could sink my teeth into that. And I would be, I mean, I would expect that sports like bodybuilding or powerlifting would probably draw in a lot of people, especially if they started early that kind of liked that aspect of it because they are I mean, they are more one-dimensional. That's not a slight, but yeah, you don't need all of the different varied physical properties to excel at bodybuilding. If anything, you just need to hyper fixate on this one trait and then milk it for all it's worth. And that probably attracts a personality type. But then you get into strongman, which is like the decathlon. You can't even call it a decathlon of strength. It's strength and endurance and explosiveness. And hey, maybe we're just not going to tell you what this event is till the day of. There's so many different qualities you have to have. And I think that's where that comes in. And that's really what separates it from powerlifting, where athleticism is definitely going to help anybody with a predisposition of like speed or explosiveness, or anybody that is used to doing a lot of different physical modalities that has good coordination. They're going to pick shit up a lot quicker. They're probably going to excel a lot faster. But yeah, it's not as deeply rooted in those sports. It's not a necessity the same way.
Any thoughts there, Joe, or more or less agree?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't really think about it until you kind of said it with kind of just that overarching, principle of people who probably weren't as athletic or weren't into athletics. But I can kind of see, yeah, like definitely. I think it comes down to kind of piggybacking off what Alex said of just you can control the controllables more, I feel like, where I've had clients that were athletes, but they weren't starting or they weren't playing. And I think that really just kind of not necessarily was negative, but it kind of they didn't get the most out of it. And having the gym, we would do their strength training, and I was like, hey, you ever think about doing powerlifting meet or a strongman competition? And that's something they probably never would have considered. But then when they started training for it, they were like, yeah, I can control when I can train. I know the events and the effort that I can put into it. And I think that kind of was like that little missing link that maybe they weren't getting from athletics, or was just kind of filling that gap of being able to have that own responsibility and show up. And even though you are competing with other people, it's more of like a kind of like a me versus me thing, right? Like I can see my progress over the years. And I think that's why people get really hooked on it. But I definitely would agree with everything that Alex has said as well. But now that I think about it more, you do probably, I wouldn't say it's exactly 100%, but I can also see, yeah, there's probably a lot of people who weren't athletes that just kind of fell into strongman or powerlifting, and actually end up probably having some pretty successful careers with it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you guys obviously have been training for a long time. I think I don't know actually, Alex, you may have the most experience in terms of years here. I'm like 20 years in myself. Joey, I think you're probably around there. So over many years, of course, progress tends to slow down. Let's say outside of, because, and I want to, this will tie into the next topic, which will be kind of like this evidence-based, industry that, people bring up. Outside of the initial lifting gains, and let's say outside of maybe an initial super supplements or anything like that, just when things were more stable, what would you say was the period in your lives where you had the most progress? And I know that there's probably several where you could think of, okay, this was like a big jump, but would you say it was a time when it was just like, hey, you know what? I wasn't working, and so it was that, or it was just this age, or was it a specific training routine? And the reason I ask is because most people have dealt with some level of stagnation, and it's not just this kind of general creep. Sometimes we have this, just again stagnation, and then suddenly there's this peak of strength, and sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what caused that. So any insights for you guys for your personal journeys?
Yeah, I've had a lot of different phases of training. I mean, I took the scenic route, which probably wasn't best for optimizing strength, for not committing to a system, but it did give me a lot of experience. And I can go all the way back to when I started. I mean, my first introduction, even though I was playing football, I didn't have a really good, I mean, the strength and conditioning setup there kind of sucked, and there wasn't a lot of direction, and kids would just kind of dick around. So most of my serious training, it was from flex or muscular development, is bodybuilding training. So I remember seeing a huge surge of growth just from locking myself in the gym for 2 or 3 hours and doing every machine and every exercise I could, because I was 12 or 13 and I was made of magic and rubber bands, and I could just, go all in. And of course I couldn't do that today, but it's one of the reasons that you almost advocate for newbies going too hard rather than not hard enough, because you can always rein that back, but you can't really teach somebody that type of kind of work ethic. But I remember doing that for a while, and then I was progressing. But I remember at some point I was 16 or so and decided, oh, I want to focus on strength specifically. and then it was Powerlifting USA. And I was repeating whatever the West Side templates were that were in there. Or, I mean, there were programs that were like just almost entirely singles. And I was like practicing my super optimized high arch, narrow grip bench. But I remember getting a huge surge of strength in that short period. And this kind of led me to kind of my ideas about training now that it is all ultimately cyclical, whether you know it or not. Diminished returns do set in for whatever you're doing. And you do have to have, if you want the closest thing to like a steady grind forward for as long as you're training, where you're not really plateaued out, there has to be like a right amount of pivoting to kind of compensate for the adaptations your body is making. And I think that's where periodization ultimately came from. But yeah, I saw huge gains every time I would like kind of niche down on one thing, knowing that that wasn't like the thing that I was going to do forever. I would do it for a while, and then when I started strongman, I was 19, I think, my first strongman contest, and that was different. Okay, it's not singles, now it's AMRAPs. Now we're doing as many deadlifts as we can in like 90 seconds. Like it's all like horrible rest pause and medleys and different stuff, and my back just hurt all the time, but my deadlift went up like 100 pounds, and it's like all these different things. So I tend to think that the biggest punctuated improvements tended to come when I had some big change in the stimulus and I just drilled into that. Not just how I changed this up, but I mean, I would like jump in and that's like all I would do. And there was this kind of logical step forward as I got closer to being competitive.
How did you balance that against the idea of, the program hopping and the people who are not consistent enough that they never make any progress because they're jumping all over the place?
Well, at the time I didn't. I was a teenager. I mean, that whole track was me from like years 12 to like 19 or 20. So I had no concept of any of this. And I was like, as much as I love training, the idea of programming gave me anxiety because I had no concept of how it all fit together. So in the beginning, I learned that, okay, if you work your ass off and you just do a lot of stuff, you're probably going to get better. I think it is extraordinarily rare that somebody works their ass off and does a lot of different things and they don't get better. Like you really have to be all over the place, super non-specialized. And that goes back to people generally not working as hard as they think they are. So that's something I paid forward. But then when I started doing the singles and shit, like, okay, that's not tenable when you're going 10 out of 10 all the time. So I kind of learned as I went, like, oh, if I bench to a top single 3 weeks in a row, especially if I'm going more than once a week, I get weaker or shit starts to hurt. Or my deadlift every week was super unpredictable. So very quickly I had to adjust that. So a lot of it was kind of intuitive in addition to taking tips from everybody around me. And it is really just chance, I think, for me specifically, that these periods lasted long enough for me to get something out of it because a program hopping thing, that's a short-term thing. That's I did this template for 3 weeks and I got kind of bored and my friends are doing this. I always bring up my Discord because they're filled with like the biggest like weightlifting loving Gen Z lunatics, but they're all just like ADD. And as soon as somebody on the server wants to do something, everybody jumps ship. And it's like, that's what I'm doing. So that's a short term thing. You have to do something long enough to show that you've actually made improvements. And then you have a lot more leeway in transitioning into something else, given that you're going to give that the same treatment. So I think if you're hitting those two things, doing it hard enough and long enough to get something out of it, and that's how you're stacking things together, I think you have a lot more leeway with variety as opposed to what people typically do for program hopping.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with a lot of things that he had said. I would say in my definitely when you start, you get those crazy, crazy gains. I think I was similar to Alex in the sense that like I was in the gym. I remember going to practice, lifting with school, then go and grab my mom's minivan, drive into the gym, spend another hour or two, and kind of comes back to what you were saying about the evidence-based, thing going on right now, where just like Alex said, if you got guys who are busting their ass going balls to the walls, like people will say maybe it's not optimal, but rarely do you find a guy that's done that. It doesn't have some sort of physique or some sort of strength, prowess, about him. Um, but I would say I really started to plateau kind of in my 20s, and that was solely due to just trying to do everything. And I was, doing Olympic weightlifting. I was getting involved with strongman. I was trying to run. Like it was just an insane time because I took a lot of pride in being versatile, but then I realized if I have 10 buckets, right, and I'm putting a drop in each bucket, it's going to take a long time to get better. So that's really when I had to sit down and start doing more structured programming and seeing what else was out there. But I do have a funny story where I remember, and maybe Alex was similar with one of his programs, but it was like 5-3-1 was the big thing, right? And I was doing 5-3-1 and it was working and working. And I was like, this is the best thing ever. And then, of course, it stops working. And I just start blaming myself, thinking I'm like, dude, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not pushing as hard as I should be. When really the answer is things just work till they don't. And then when they don't, you have to sit there and, reassess or, take the paradigm shift and kind of attack a different approach. And maybe if you come back to that 5-3-1 or you make some adjustments, it'll work. So I think it's just kind of like the lifter's journey arc you go through if you're going to be in it for a long time is trying different programs and that means actually giving it a good run, like doing it in its entirety, taking notes, making the adjustments, and not program hopping. But I think for me, what really helped with the surge of, getting those results was getting more specific depending on those goals that I had, really honing in on those skills and pushing that. And yeah, I would see that, my deadlift and my overhead press started going up dramatically when I really prioritize and focus on those things. That also means other things are probably going to go on the back burner. So it's kind of weighing like, what do I really want to put the time in? What am I okay with having maybe a diminishing return or maintaining at this point? And now I'm at the point where it kind of just depends. Like I'll periodize my year, like and almost look at it like life in seasons where hey, maybe I'm at maintenance for my gym, but my personal and career life is something we're really going to double down on, And I think that's a big one that a lot of lifters forget about because we can be so identity focused and driven and narrow focused on with like just numbers specifically. But like for example, we got married and we had a kid and your life is going to change drastically. So when you kind of fit those things into play, it's like, yeah, maybe my deadlift wasn't as great as it was, but one, my personal life, I'm happier or I'm more relaxed. My stress levels are better in some areas and maybe some not, but it's kind of like fitting this whole thing in the grand scheme of it and kind of like just working those pieces of the pie. And like right now, I think I'm kind of in that phase where less can be more. Not saying that I'm not working as hard, but I'm just more focused on the amount of time that I have. And if it comes down to certain movements, like what's the best bang for my buck that I want to use, versus in the past, I've tried to do everything, and just put it all into these crazy sessions. So there's a lot of variables there. But kind of like I said, if you've been doing this for a long time, you probably have a lot of different program styles under your belt. You can probably see where they fit into what's needed. And then outside of that, just looking at, your year or your kind of just taking that bird's eye view, and then matching those pieces of the puzzle together where they seem fit. But yeah, it's going to come and go. Like it's always that way. And all you can do is just try to make those gains. And then it's like that, just that basic stepping kind of diagram that you always see, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, and I mean, certainly with my own training, like there have been times where I wish I could point to exactly what caused it, Like I mean, my deadlift also went up about 100 pounds my sophomore year of college. And it's like, yeah, I did some things different, but like that was actually the first year I started doing intermittent fasting. I'm sure that was not the reason it went up 100 pounds, right? Like there were other things. It's like I don't know. Maybe I was just primed at that time. It sometimes it can be hard to pinpoint, and we want to have this exact answer, but sometimes like the stars align. I do like that what both of you guys said. It's rare that you see somebody who's just really going at it, who isn't making some substantial progress. And I would even say I mean, the consistency I would say is very important. But as far as like the program hopping, I'm certainly against program hopping. I mean, I've literally done sometimes the same routine for like the exact same routine for over a year. So I'm very much against program hopping. But I would still say that if you take somebody in that first, especially 5 to 7 years of training, I feel like even if they were program hopping, if they were really going at it every time they were in there, and then the intensity is there, and they're still focused on progression, I still think like you're gonna progress if you're eating right and sleeping right, all those other things. So it's like, yeah, we avoid program hopping, but like as long as the program isn't ridiculous and the intensity's there, you're gonna have something to show for it.
Yeah, there's a philosophical question there as far as what's better for onboarding newbies. A lot of variety or just focusing on the same bare bones. So it would be the difference between an athlete or let's say a bodybuilder doing everything in the gym or, let's say a CrossFit athlete, even something like that, as opposed to starting strength, right? Which is like the same few lifts just done on repeat in the most monotonous, grinded, hyper specific way possible. And it's made difficult because newbies grow from everything, because we walk around artificially weak, because we're all sedentary and we're way below where we should be, anyways. So that jump up to like our actual baseline is quick, pretty much no matter who you are. And that leads people to believe that their first gains that they got show that they know something about training, which is almost never true.
Yeah.
So then when things actually get stagnant, then you start to pay the price for the things you did or didn't take care of. That's a big thing in athletic development too. You know, do you have kids do the Tiger Woods thing and just do 10,000 golf swings a week or whatever? Or do you have them in a bunch of different sports and get that base? Especially the strongmen I've talked to. I mean, I'm sure it's one of the reasons Joey was as good as he was. I talked to recently Hooper and Hatton, who both credited their like wide athletic career to like kind of fleshing out their base so much. I mean, Hatton said it was something like, well, I already had like 15 years of GPP behind me. So now it was really just a straight shot to the top as far as strength went. Like he was that much closer to where he needed to be once he started packing on weight and getting bigger. And they credit it to their adaptability, to their durability, and being more injury proof. Again, more specific to strongman rather than just generally getting strong, but it kind of stands like to what degree are people better off with having this base underneath them? And we keep talking about like programs, the routine, like you said, the routine not being so crazy, and you have to have a handle on what a routine is. Like when Joe brought up 531, I mean that's decidedly different than what like let's say Ed Cohn was running through, because he would just run through the same thing on repeat. Well, why would one work indefinitely and the other wouldn't? And that has to do with the way the programs are actually structured. 531 is a lot more narrow. There isn't as much variability. It's 3 weeks of different percentages, and you're only jumping weight once every 3 or 4 weeks across it. So it's very slow, very drawn out, not a lot of variability within the week. Whereas if you're Cone or a lot of the other powerlifters, you're running through something where the program is varied and it starts out broad and nebulous and doing all these things, and then it goes through this. So you have the variation baked in. So if you do have a program that has that built into it, you can absolutely run that on repeat almost indefinitely. I just talked to Sam Sheether recently. He does the same thing. He just repeats the same routines, but that variation is baked into it. So that is viable for years on end. 531 starting strength. A lot of the popular programs work very, very well for a short period of time. They do have a shelf life. And that's when you have to have an intuition around like, okay, what do I need? I mean, you could run 531 and just throw in one of the add-ons. You could say, oh, well, I'm going to do boring but big for a while or whatever. And that counts as that variation. But that ultimately comes down to just pacing those variables on volume, effort, exercise selection, and so on. And it's not that complex. People get lost in the options, but typically you can intuit a few small changes that'll get you there.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Alex has said. So my pretty much my entire strength career, I would say I didn't really mess with conjugate. Like I always knew conjugate and like the elephant in the room, people talk about conjugate and that kind of stuff. And I had some downtime last year and I started running it. And I use the analogy because I used to play video games a lot when I was younger. And it was like you have your regular game where you have your levels and you have level 1 to level 10, and everybody has the same progression. Like Alex and I are going to play the same level and we're going to get to, level 10 eventually. Where when I started messing with conjugate, I felt like it was like an open world game and I was just dropped in the middle of it. It's like, hey, here are your principles and concepts. You can go for the big boss that's right in front of you, like if you're playing like Elden Ring or some shit like that, or you can take the side quests. So for me, I'm like trying to wrap my head around it. And then once I kind of dumbed it down a bit, just to what Alex was saying, and to credit his point, is that if you do it correctly, you can run it for so long, and that's why people do. And it's like then you look back on something like a 531, and you can realize, like you said, it's you're drawn to it because it's very basic. Boom, boom, boom. This is what you're doing. Here's your progression. And it works until it doesn't, and you have to be aware of that. But then you have something like conjugate where it's like if you stick to these principles, obviously you have your certain structured days and you can fine tune it a little bit. But that's like kind of what you were saying is you can just keep reusing that and reflipping that. And that seems to be what a lot of those guys were doing and still probably do to this day. So it's just, different ways to skin a cat, but it's cool when you're getting to that point where you can start to realize those things. And I think that's where it becomes really fun. But I can see being a beginner, especially nowadays, man. Oh my gosh, it is so overwhelming. Like I would hate to restart right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits, but there's probably also just so much information overload, and it probably doesn't help to the fact of the programming hopping. Kind of like Alex saying with his Discord, right? You just have so and so coming up on the social media, and then everybody wants to just drop what they're doing and hop on it, and but just kind of a funny tangent with the conjugate
Sure.
style programming.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was getting into it, it was really like the forums and the ebooks. Those were both really big. So this was like 2005 is when I really, took it seriously. So yeah, 20 years now. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but I do kind of feel fortunate that it was a time where, I mean, certainly, I mean, you have like T Nation putting out new articles every week, and those articles would contradict each other and whatnot. But the forums, while beneficial, I don't know. I didn't feel like it was the same. Whereas today, I could easily see how you could just be on like TikTok or anything else, and it's like you got to follow this and you got to follow this, and this influencer, it could be very, I think, confusing. Not to mention, of course, the influence of like SARMs and PEDs at a very young age. Nowadays, so there's a lot there. Now, when did both of you guys actually start lifting seriously? Like roughly how long ago?
I started lifting when I was 12. I would say it was serious from the start. I mean, that's when I had the most angst and I don't know, self-hatred where like
Mhm.
lifting is this big coping mechanism and that's,
Sure.
it's like whatever social problems or school problems or family problems, like I'm gonna go to 24-hour fitness at 1 a.m. and just live there and I'm not gonna sleep tonight. But yeah, I was very young, but that's probably when I was the most reckless and worked the hardest. And as many days as I could get in, I would do it. And I carried that through all the way until I don't think I really slowed down until I was like 20 or 21. And that's where I got a big reduction in volume because I was actually having to work more and focus on school and other things. And, also 10 years of like grinding, things slowed down. But then it's like, oh, hey, I can lower volume and still progress even better on the back end of running myself ragged for so long. And that was very viable for a while. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm about 20, 25, 26 years in of not really missing weeks.
Yeah. And how about you, Joe?
I would probably say similar to Alex. Like I was the traditional bullied as a kid. Go in my room, put on, whatever album I had, blare the music. Nobody even knew what I was doing. Just yeah, just full of like you said, angst and self-hatred and just wanting to like prove people wrong. And I think when I went from was it sixth or seventh grade or seventh grade, eighth grade, I lost like 30 pounds. And I remember I walked into school and it was just like that moment where like people just looked at you differently. And I was just like, yeah, dude, like I just fucking went ham for months, like because I was just tired of being that guy. So it was always serious. It definitely wasn't structured probably in any way that made sense, but in terms of like the work ethic and really making a priority, it was definitely one of my top priorities, if not the highest at that time. And then when I was a senior in high school, I did a bodybuilding show. So like that was like, I knew a guy who was a competitive bodybuilder, was my friend's dad, and we'd show up to the gym and we'd train, and that was big with like I remember like Animal was super popular. So, I was like going to these underground animal events and in the
Yeah,
animal
yeah.
forum and stuff like that. So yeah, I would always say I was always bit by the bug very early on. And I know it's cliche. um, and today I see people put up things like the gym is not therapy, and they come out with this like really elaborate, deep response about why it's actually not therapy. But if I didn't have the gym or training, like I for sure would have been involved with drugs or something way worse. So in my brain, it definitely has helped me in a
Sure.
therapeutic way, even though it's causing probably tremendous amounts of you know, central nervous system
Yeah.
fatigue and stress. But other than that, no, I do think there were so many benefits, and yeah, that just kind of transferred over to whatever specific goal down the road. I would just take that mindset and then further knowledge that I had and actually get more dialed in and keep adding tools to the toolbox.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna say, like, I agree. I resonate a lot with all that too, because I was I was fatter when I was a kid, and that was a big motivation. First was to lose weight, but I do remember after getting knocked around and yelled, uh, yelled at by the coaches for like 2 or 3 years. That first time I went in after summer and somebody's like, "Have you been working out?" I just remember that one feeling because I had always identified as the fat kid, and those were the insults that got thrown my way when I was in sixth, seventh, eighth grade. And I just remember that spark. Like that was there was no other compliment I've ever got in my entire life that's burned into my brain as much as that. Like, are your shoulders a little bigger? And it's like that was it. It's like fast
Yeah.
forward 20 years and here we are. But the therapy thing, like completely, because okay, is it like literal therapy where you're working through your problems and you're actually going to deconstruct like no, it's not. It is a coping mechanism that is of any mechanism you could find is above and beyond like probably the best and most
Mhm.
productive and healthiest. And it's like I don't know, people almost have to invent trade-offs to be contrarian. But as far as given that we all live in a society where we do this, we sit down all day, we're not very active, our bodies deteriorate, that's linked to our mental health. It's no different than putting a fucking rubber tire in a cage with a tiger. It's something to swat at, to gas yourself out. And if in the process you can learn that, oh, hey, I actually have agency and control over my body and I can set goals and work towards things, it's just so monumentally fantastic. And I know that's for myself, I know that's been absolutely integral in changing how I see myself, just being able to speak publicly. This isn't something I would have been able to do beforehand, and it just evolved by virtue of kind of seeing myself in this arena in this different light. Anyways, so yeah, so many positives compared to I think the wildly overinflated negatives that people like to harp on today. But yeah, I think it's fair enough to call it therapy.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny because like I was a fat kid growing up as well, and I remember started exercising, purposely when I was about 10. I mean, sports, even younger than that, but actively trying to lose weight at 10. And I did it in a very unhealthy way. I didn't know anything. I remember hearing about a ketogenic diet, asking my dad if like beef had carbs. I was like, just know nothing. And but the compliments obviously became very addicting. I remember in eighth grade being at a pool party and this girl I had a crush on asked me for a number, like just like things like that are so stupid, but really meant a lot at that time. And you certainly get addicted to it. And then even with, again, the therapy aspect of it, I feel like anybody who has, and I mentioned this on a recent podcast, if you've learned to manipulate your body and just wait, it almost becomes a superpower. Because if you think about it, like 99% of the population is constantly trying to change their weight, right? And maybe we are thinner than we want to be right now, or maybe we're fatter than we want to be, whatever it is. But all of us here have the ability to gain or lose 20 pounds at will, more or less, right? If we decided we wanted to do it. And people are like, how did you do that? And it again becomes a superpower. You don't have to think about it. It might be hard, but we know exactly what to do. And with that ability to manipulate your body, there is a confidence and a sense of, just an ability to handle things. Obviously, when you've gone, like, especially if we've ever gotten like very, very lean, doing something that difficult makes other things easier, relatively speaking. So I think it, again, like you said, Alex, it's not like a specific therapy like you would be seeing a therapist, but there's certainly very tangible benefits.
Yeah, yeah, completely. It's like anything else that there's no separating of power and ability and responsibility. You can quote that to Stanley and whoever he took it from, whatever. But if you do want agency and you do want, like you said, a superpower, it's also going to have the ability to go sideways, and it can if you don't know how to set goals properly, or if you are really using it to mask your insecurity and there's deeper problems you're not addressing. I could see people getting eating disorders or having it worsen their circumstances without something tethering them to the ground. But the fact is, a world where you actually have a relationship with food, where you understand it works the way gas works in your car, and when you can look at it like that, of course. I did this reaction video the other day to it was another one of those like doom and gloom trumped up videos about the male body image crisis, which, no doubt there are issues that exist, but they paint like the Brazilians with like 30-inch arms filled with synthol. It paints that as like the slippery slope we're all headed
Yeah, yeah.
to. And it gets like that. But I went down kind of the eating disorder guide because now they're trying to put bigorexia next to anorexia. And it's like, well, I've seen pictures of people with anorexia. It's like I remember when that was a big epidemic. That's not the same as the 19-year-old who wants to be 220 and lean. Like top to bottom, any way you frame it, it's not even in the same universe. But I was looking at how they describe or how they define eating disorders, and then part of that is counting disordered eating, and what counts as disordered eating is some of the most ridiculous shit you've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one authority that had like a sign of disordered eating using steroids or creatine. But then you go past that, and it's like, well, if you're if you're withholding individual types of food, like you're obligated to eat everything in the food pyramid, or if you're, it's basically anything that described what an amateur bodybuilder might do. If your
Yeah.
eating is too controlled and rigid, so I could go eat at Sonic like 3 times a day, and as long as I'm getting 3 squares and it's kind of consistent, like that counts as ordered eating. But everybody has this relationship with food that you should be entitled to just kind of eat whatever is around you and not feel bad about it or think about it. And if you try to get a handle on it, well, hey, be careful because it's a slippery slope. You're going to be jamming synthol into your neck
Right.
before you
Right.
know it, which is like so. It's like Looneyville compared to what's actually killing people in the West.
Sure.
Like it doesn't even make sense that this stands as a topic of discussion today. Sorry, that's my
Yeah.
shower
No,
rant
no.
for the day.
One of the things I was going to mention is just because we've all been lifting for so long, I don't know exactly where you guys are in your, current goals and whatnot. I know personally, like I'm probably at a point in my life where I'm not going for like the true PRs anymore. I've switched. I've kind of gone down like this little like calisthenics journey that's kind of sparked a new interest in me. There's different things that I find very interesting. I'm still extremely consistent, but I don't really have any plans to hit like a new 1 rep max bench squat deadlift. I don't know where you guys are now, but how do you program for yourself at this point? I assume you both still take it very seriously. Are you at a point where you say, hey, you know what? I'm probably not going to be at my peak strength ever again? Or is it, or are you still going for that? And how are you programming differently now compared to when you potentially were?
I'll let you go, Joe. I
Uh,
talked a
s-
lot.
no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we could say off the last couple topics, so I'm here for it. But yeah. So right now, obviously, we had our first child in October, so that's a big life event. So at that point, and even prior to that, it was me focusing. It really wasn't any like I haven't been on social media much besides my Instagram. I haven't put out YouTube videos because that's a whole other topic, which can be a vicious cycle mentally as well. And we talk about, probably when we grew up when we didn't have that versus when that became implemented, how I'd be very interested to see how that would change lifters' mindsets or body image type of things like that. So maybe a conversation for another day on there. But I've just been focusing way more on in-person connections and my career outside of social media. I'll definitely get back onto it at some point. Um, but I wasn't competing or anything. So at that point, it was just doing stuff that I enjoyed and being consistent with it, right? Like I wasn't trying to hit crazy PRs. And if they were PRs, there were in variations that maybe I haven't tried before because that was fun and it was different and it kept me excited to go and train. At this point, I've been getting used to the schedule of having a kid now. So training has been a lot more consistent. I do still want to do some things in strongman. To what level that goes, I'm not sure, but it gives me a goal. I have a date that I'm going to sign up and do something. And right now, when it comes to programming, I'm actually working with Chad Coy, mainly because, well, one, his knowledge in strongman and how long he's been in the sport has just been very cool, like as a mentor. But then also what he does professionally is with sports performance for the Parisi system. And me working with athletes, I was like, this could be a lot of fun, like where I can take what I know knowledge wise as of right now. You've been around for way longer than I have. You work with a lot of athletes, and really that's what we said. We're like, let's just have fun collaborating. Like, let's play around with some different programming ideas, where I'm at today versus where I was in the past. How can we put together the best overall package for where I'm at today? So that's kind of been what we've been doing, and we're running more of a conjugate or concurrent style template. And what I've been really enjoying is actually doing like bi-weekly. So like week 1 and 3 are similar, and weeks 2 and 4 are similar. And I used to be a big fan of block periodization and higher frequency. And there was a time when that absolutely worked for me. Like my deadlift was just shooting up, my pressing was going up. And I thought, hey, I'm onto something, right? This higher frequency thing is really where it's at. And as we have talked about, well, I reran that model and things weren't going well. So it was just
Mm.
kind of like this weird moment for me where I'm like, I don't have it figured out. I don't, I don't know where to go from here. So linking up with him, we've been playing with variables and been just having a lot of fun and getting after it and getting back to being more of an athlete. I think one of my biggest, not regrets, because it had to happen, was when I got into strongman, I was coming out of a big athletic kind of, stint of my career, where I tried to make up for what I didn't have in raw strength with using technique or using the Olympic lifting, like the jerk variations and all that kind of stuff, or just speed on moving events. And then I realized I had to get stronger. So I put on a lot of size and was getting statically, a lot better. But then when I'd go to move laterally or go to do those moving events, I felt like, I was a water buffalo that was drowning. So it's kind of just figuring out, okay, well, how can we kind of mesh those two back together? Because even, I keep talking about having a kid because I think, for me, it's the coolest thing ever, but I want to be able to play with my kid. And I know it's cliche, but it's true. Like when you're really pushing stuff in terms of strength and going into those hard training cycles for months or years on end, your knees are shot, your back is shot. Like there's no way around that type of thing. And it sucks in your personal life when you're like, I just want to get down and mess with my kid. And I'm like sitting there going down like a 6 point stance to get down on one knee. So my perspective has changed in that regard where, hey, if I can do the best well-rounded package while still having the personal things that I want and, the strength that is probably the best it could be for where I'm at, then I'm happy. If there's PRs there, awesome. Like, yeah, would it be sick to, smoke a 400 some pound log? Fantastic. If it doesn't happen, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Where in the past, I probably would have, had a fit and freaked out. And it's like, yeah, if you make podium, that's fantastic. And I'm always going to try my best. But hey, there's nothing wrong with just showing up and competing, getting to hang out with your friends and just seeing what you can do with the time that you've prepared and learn. So I would say as I've gotten older, and I'm sure Alex can talk more about this because he's put in more years than I have. And maybe it's similar, maybe it's different. I don't know, but you get more, I would say, I guess, lifting wisdom and more of that bird's eye view as you get older. And I can tell that's definitely happened in the last several years for me, where things have definitely drastically changed in how I look about training and competing. And, you know, uh, at one point that was everything and that's all that mattered. And now it's like, it's not everything. It's not all that matters, but it's a great part of what I'm doing. But there's definitely like hard lines with things as well for me too on what I'm willing to do and not willing to do. What's the ROI, I guess, is the better statement. I always ask myself that.
Congrats on having a kid, by the way. Mine, our first just turned 13 months. Um, just
Nice. Yeah,
started
congrats,
to
dude.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just took his first steps a couple days ago. So we're
Nice.
like super excited, but you're staging a strongman comeback off not a lot of sleep, I imagine right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. But like I said, it's a different mindset, I think, and that's maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, like I'd be interested to hear your take on it. Like as you've gotten older yourself and have been putting in those years, like have you had a shift in some sense, or are certain things still the same? Like do you have like key tenet principles, or I don't know. Like, yeah, feel free to kind of just
Yeah,
riff.
yeah, it shifts and so like I mean if I lay all the cards on the table, I'm 38 right now. Um and the thing that's stuck in the back of my teeth like a piece of popcorn from like a movie I saw last week, it's the fact that I had always had this goal of reaching a certain level when I was very young, and I've come very close to it on like six different occasions. Like I've competed at all the big middleweight shows. Um Probably been in a contention for a pro card where, it was about a coin flip if I was going to like meet that minimum requirement. And then, something happened. Some of it's preparedness, some of it's, I wasn't ready like I thought I was. And some of it is just the wind blew the other way that day. But I'm always like, if I knuckle down for a year, I know I can get there. It's like right there. But in the time, it's like, okay, I'm older. YouTube became like my central means of income, which I'm ecstatic over. I never thought that would be a thing. And I want to optimize that so I don't have like insecurity over the next 10 or 20 years, when I invariably do stop competing. I want better things for my wife, for my kid, and then also I want to be able to spend time with my kid. Oh, and also I'm 38, so everything kind of fucking hurts because I've been doing this for 25 years. And it's like, bro, getting on the ground. Because I see you, Joe, as an athlete, not just because your background, but I've seen your videos, I've seen your capabilities, just the fact that you could do like a front rack with a barbell. It's like, God damn, it's like, what's that like? So the fact that you're having trouble getting on the ground gives me so much peace because I'm at the point where if money drops on the ground, I have to like calculate the dollar amount, like what it's worth to me to get down and pick it up. If it's less than like 75 cents, I'm like, it's gone forever. And same thing getting down with my son. I mean, I have to like warm up before I bend over to pick him up off the ground. And there's a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, this is stupid. Like I know I'm gonna be in great shape for this other show where I can just get to the bottom of the sandbag and that's all I need to do. But yeah, for day-to-day stuff, it kind of sucks. So I'm being realistic about my future. I'm like, okay, from where I'm at, I could probably maintain or increase my competitiveness probably until my mid 40s. Now, if you want to go really stupid with like pharmaceuticals or whatever, which I have no intention of doing, maybe longer. I mean, there's guys in their 50s that probably got themselves another 10 years or so. But I am at the age where a lot of guys start cycling out of strongman after being good for so long. The only reason I give myself those years are because, like I said earlier, I did take the scenic route and I know a lot of the things I left on the table. So even the years where I trained very hard, I can point to the lack of structure. Even the years where I had a lot of downtime and should have made a lot of ground, I can point to the times where I was focusing on other things. So I know what a real good, I've had a few, probably 3 or 4 really solid dead on preps. And I can point to all the times where I didn't do that. So I know that there's something else there. Right now, it's just weighing like, okay, but is the juice worth the squeeze? And there's some days where it is, there's some days where it isn't. My last 2 shows, I didn't compete for 2 years around having my son, and my first comeback was regionals to get into the Arnold, and I won. I did well, but it was kind of a lower level show. And then I went to OSG and I went to the Arnold, and it was like 2 of the worst shows I ever had. And I'm like, okay, the comebacks aren't happening as fast. I have a kid, so my sleep is messed up. I'm stressed out over YouTube content all the time to the point where I will skip training sessions if I feel like I'm behind on something. And I have all these things stack up, and it's like, okay, well, if I am gonna reach out there, it is going to take something extra. And again, is it worth it? I've done some things I didn't think I'd be able to do if you would have asked me, 20 years ago. So, yeah, it is a back and forth. The thing that I think people should take away from this is, for one, maintenance is like the easiest thing in the world, and people stress out. They in their head they have 2 things. They have optimal, like some perfect thing that's like putting me on the fast track to my goals, and then a bunch of other shit that's not worth doing. That's how people conceptualize training, which is the most backwards, like dysfunctional way of viewing it. Because optimal, even if we say it exists, which it doesn't, is something you're not entitled to. Most training blocks you're not going to have gains or like noticeable gains. So anything where you do have some amount of growth, that's a fucking bonus, but you can hang it up for a year. And if you're just doing a couple workouts a week, you can maintain most of your strength, uh, putting things on the back burner. You don't have to train 10 hours a week in order to just maintain. You can go very long periods of time. And then when you do jump back in, comebacks happen extraordinarily quick. So that's one of the things that helped me stay sane is I had to like deal with other life obligations. And that's something that I'm dealing with right now. It's like, okay, at this point of stagnation, I had my maintenance phase. Now it's like, okay, are we going to rev it up or am I going to back off? But I'm very pragmatic and I think logical about how many years I got left, what I can likely give to it, and what my exit strategy is going to be. Because I'm not trying to be 50 years old, bulking so I can compete in the Masters. It's like I would like my heart to function into my later years.
You guys are both making me feel better about my what I thought was my broken body, but I don't know at the point of needing a 6 point stance there.
Bro, we went bowling last night, and I was just like, I think I tweaked my hip, So I'm like, is this my life? And it's funny because people, they probably see, a guy like us or any of us like in there, and they're like, oh, that dude is just, meanwhile, I'm like, fuck, dude. But that's life. And at the same time, I wouldn't have it any other way because the like you said, it's all about the journey and getting there. And if you weren't training and you weren't doing the things that we all do, like that, those are far worse consequences long term than kind of living this lifestyle. And as long as you're, yeah, like like Bromley was saying, there's a whole other route that people can push, and that's on them. But for the most part, there's so many positives. But it is actually refreshing to talk to people because sometimes I'm like, dude, does this guy feel this way? Like,
Yeah.
how are they up there? Like, what is, I don't get it. But I'm like, no, everybody's pretty much having some sort of broken feeling somewhere or floating pain. But yeah,
It
Yeah.
floats. I don't even know. The science is going to get to the bottom of that. It's like there's some fixed amount of pain and inflammation you have to have in your body, and it
Somewhere.
just arbitrarily moves around
yeah,
and it's inexplicable. And there's no point trying to get to the bottom of it.
no, it is what it is.
I'm curious, and this is my ignorance here on like strongman, because I know it's, you hear like obviously powerlifting stats, they're just kind of an objective stat there. Bodybuilding is obviously very subjective. I know a little bit more, Joe, your stats and background and whatnot relative to each other. Bromley, have you competed more and taken it further, or like I don't really know which one of you as far as strongman
Bromley has
specifically.
definitely competed way more than I have, so he's definitely more of the
But then,
veteran.
as far as like the level though, I mean, what you won USS Nats 1 year?
Yeah, I won USS Nats in 2019, and then I went to Ukraine for Ultimate Strongman,
Oh
and
wow.
then there were yeah just a bunch of other shows. So yeah,
Yeah.
but
So
that's the extent.
I mean, yeah, winning I mean, USS Nats, it's like, that and Strongman Corp are like the two big dogs. And I think there's some undulation as far as how competitive any given division is in one or the other any given year. But the shows are, I mean, heavy as shit. I mean, they're competitive. It's not an easy thing to do. I've never done USS Nats, but I mean, I took fifth at OSG in 2019. I got an invite to America's Strongest Man, and then I've competed at the Arnold a couple times, and I think there's a couple other. So I've been at the big shows, but like I don't have any big wins. Like that's kind of the thing. I've always historically tried to like outkick my coverage, so I don't have a lot of trophies behind me, but I think it's kept me growing.
And each
And
show
all of
can
my
have different events, right? I mean, it's not like you're just going to
Yeah,
the standard event. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's all different. That's the other thing, there's controversy. Reddit fans like to bring up like, oh well, Eddie Hall only won because World's Strongest Man had his events in it, and that can happen. But the guys that do well consistently, typically don't have that issue of needing the wind to blow their way. And that's something to be very self-aware about when you're trying to prepare. It's very easy when you get a bad beat to just look at the circumstances, but people don't often look at like the things that were in their corner that they should have done X, Y, or Z and didn't anyway. So,
sure,
but
sure.
yeah,
Cool, cool. Cool. All right. So I've got two topics. So one's going to be tangential to what we were talking about. One's a secret topic here. So the next topic that we kind of touched on. So the evidence-based industry that's kind of gotten more and more popular. Every video's got science in the title and all this stuff.
let's go.
Alex, I know you had some good videos
there goes
there.
the monster. He's ready.
Um, how do you guys feel the overall industry is now compared to 5 to 10 years ago? Do you think that the average 18-year-old new to lifting is better off if they time traveled to 5 to 10 years ago to get started, or is better off today?
Can I just add one thing to start this, and then Alex, you can have at it. Because this is something that does actually bother me, and it's tough because I'm friends with so many of these people, probably the same as all you guys. Like I have total meathead bro guys, and then I'm friends with some of the smartest minds in the evidence base, and here I am, right in the middle. But I think what kind of grinds my gears of today is I think it's almost an ego battle between top people to prove very minute points that for the majority of the people that are looking at it, it doesn't really apply or matter to them, but they have such high like standards to everybody that's watching it or a reputation that they become so focused on that instead of really just doing the basics or the other more general broad things that are really going to take them places. Not to discredit the points that the evidence-based community makes because they are valid, in most cases. But it just pisses me off because you do have a high schooler who's watching, these very specific, different ranges of motion and different programming styles. And but I think when it comes down to it, it's like, well, what this person's trying to one up this person, and that's really what it's about. but we are watching that and thinking that that's kind of what we need to be focusing on. And that's kind of goes back to our main point where it's like you take, yeah, Johnny, whatever, who's getting into lifting, and you don't even show him that stuff, but you give him some basic framework. And if he's got the drive and the consistency and the work ethic, he's probably going to be pretty damn strong and have a really great physique. And he may never even touch any of those little minute details that the evidence community is saying, or putting so much, like pushing so much. I would say, if that makes any sense. And I can get into more like specific details if we needed to, but I think kind of generally that's just for me what grinds my gears, because I know them personally, so I know that they're like, I gotta have a battle with this person, and it's going to be over either the range of motion or the exercise or this programming style or how many reps or sets does it actually matter. And it's just like, yeah, for you guys, I understand that, but you have a following of hundreds of thousands of maybe millions of people at this point now. And to them, that shit doesn't matter. Like it maybe it does 10 years from now. But what I find is dealing with high schoolers, those are the questions that they ask me, right?
Hmm.
It's like these little weird things, not just like hey, like if I'm doing push pull legs, like, is this a good place to start? I'm like, it's more does this range of motion to this degree matter, or how many sets to failure do I really need to go? And really and it's just like, dude, like just go fucking train, man. Like just
If
just go train. And but it's just tough for me because I just see it so much, and kind of sometimes where I don't even want to look at it. But anyway, that's my rant. So Alex, take it
No,
away, bro.
no, that's a great place to start because I want to say that that is like the crux of my irritation with all of it is the relationship between the communicator and the audience. Because, and I mean, we can look at, and I know we're strength guys generally, but strength and hypertrophy has an immense overlap. Very, very, like I got into an argument with Paul Carter because I had a video that was called Volume's King for Size and Strength, meaning just go out and do a lot of work. You're going to be okay. And I was giving my points. And Paul Carter he's hypertrophy only now in his career. And he has a big thing about, well, you never really need to go over this many sets. He has his ideology. It's a very hard line. And he has his bits of research he likes to prop it up with. The big missing piece was size and strength, where you don't really know a reliable strength program that doesn't hinge on the manipulation of volume or go through increased volume phases at some point. Hypertrophy, it's kind of a different thing, but very, very, very few people are like, I just want to get bigger, but I don't care at all about strength. People will say that. Usually it's a cope, but I'm not going to get into that. The audience is the really big thing because everybody is fighting for their thumbnail on a screen the size of your phone, and they need it to stand out, and they get their tribalism. So if we look at the guy who's kind of dominating that space now, it's Israel, and he comes out, and it's if you do the math on his analytics, it's like he's gotten to the point where he's reliably getting 1 million views on his videos, his celebrity lifting analytics, or his celebrity lifting videos analyses. And if you do the math, it's like 1 million views. You probably have something like a 5% click-through rate. And it's like, okay, well, those are 20 million impressions. And then if you consider a 30, 40-minute video, he's probably getting 8 to 10 minutes of watch time on that, meaning the average person isn't getting past his first run of dick jokes before you actually get into the meat and potatoes, the nuances, as they say. So when you have however the thumbnail presents it with the sensationalized title, which I have issues with coming from a science communicator. Anyways, the really big thing is how you are training people to engage with scientific discussions. And you can't claim that it's fair game if you're literally a science communicator, but you're using kind of the sensationalized tabloid headlines to train people to react to your thumbnails in a way that science consumers are not supposed to react. And the reason is that the term science is one of the most powerful things you can slap on any product you're ever selling, which is like Jeff Nippert doesn't even have like an advanced degree in a lot of this stuff, but he has a bachelor's in some tangential degree. It's not like exercise science though. But he leaned into this and started reviewing studies because it got an immense amount of positive feedback because the consumer believes that this is what they need to do. And there's this weird thing that happens with YouTube because we're doing keyword research, trying to figure out what people are searching for, and we make videos on that. But it's all of the uneducated masses that need to be, it's like the students writing the syllabus. We're making content and framing it to satisfy with the people that need to be educated, and it's very backwards and toxic, and that's what frustrates me. So yeah, what is best for the average person? You know, you can say, oh, this guy likes nerding out. Well, what does that mean? That means going above and beyond into the minutia more than you need to. That's what nerding out is. Engineers don't call double checking their math nerding out. That's just work, because it won't work if you don't do that. So nerding out implies excess stuff. But for every person that likes to nerd out, there's 100 people that are led to believe that their gains hinge on what is being discussed in this roundtable hypertrophy discussion of whether or not you should do length and partials only, or 1.5 reps, or full reps with it. And it gets absolutely insane, because you're talking about one little pebble on the beach out of a sea of variables. And if you change one, it changes all the others, and nobody takes that into account. And it becomes a clusterfuck, and people get lost and they get overwhelmed. And it's something that is not going to bother the ever-loving shit out of you unless you have worked hands-on with lots and lots of people over the years, like Joey has, especially teenagers. You work with athletes, they want the shortcut. So you get an idea of what they think the shortcut is by the questions they're asking you. And you're like, no, 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 no. You need to worry about A, B, and C. Everything after that is so far above your pay grade. I mean, it's like you're trying to run a mile to gain an inch. Like, it is not worth the effort. You're not even going to get it right. It's not even going to do what you think it's going to do. You're just going to spin your wheels. So a lot of the people that kind of push back or talk about their experiences, or will side one way or another, don't have that just constant reinforcement from the people you're working with to see how absolutely twisted around their perspective is, because optimal is a buzzword. You're not entitled to it. If you go through a 6 month block of training and you're a little bit better, that's a fucking win. You did more than you were actually entitled to. And people that can string that together get really, really good. Whereas, like I said in the beginning, people think it's either I'm doing the best thing I could ever possibly do in all possible universes, or it's like, what's the fucking point? Which is just, it's toxic. It's not the way to make progress in any arena in life, especially this one.
I think at one point, if you saw Joey and I both like really nodding our heads, and when you said it's my issue with it is similar in that it's the belief among people watching that it's going to make the big difference. And the reason I have an issue with that is the same thing with almost any topic. It's like, who is your audience and who is it relevant to? Like by analogy, there was a thing I remember, and this isn't like to hate on Lane Norton, but when he used to sell BCAAs, one of the things he would say would be like, you know what, like you don't need them, but if you want to have that edge, if you're somebody who really takes it seriously, then you want to buy it. And my issue was that was like, okay, you're kind of telling the truth. Now, again, we're assuming at this point that the research shows that BCAAs were actually useful. I think most people agree now they're not, but let's just pretend that they were a little useful. The issue I have with that, it's almost like you can imagine like the car salesman who says, like psychology 101, sales 101, like, I don't care if you buy from, me or somebody else on the street. I just want you to have the good car. It's like by saying you don't care about who they buy from, it makes the other person kind of think that way. Same thing if you're selling this BCAs and you're like, well, it only matters if you really care. Well, who's going to be like, well, I don't care. No, you're going to be that athlete, that person who's like, no, no, I take pride in being that top 1 or 2%. So this is going to be the edge. And then when that person, who's maybe a genetic phenom is in the gym and they're making the progress, it's, well, you know what? I take it really seriously. I bought the BCAAs. I'm that 1 or 2%. But in reality, it was all kind of nonsense. And when it comes to some of these videos, it's like, there's going to be people who soar past other people who are doing these things, and they're actually believing it's because I do the length and partials. It's because I watched, 100 Mike Israel videos, and it's that little bit. And it's like, no, man, like that's not why you're actually surpassing. It's the consistency. It's the ABC that Alex is talking about. And those videos, it all hinges on getting people to believe that the minutia matters, because of course you have a whole industry. Yeah, this is your career, so the people making the content, they have to keep pushing out content. And I can understand the struggle of that. Like, this is not my full-time career, so I don't have that pressure on me. I understand that there is a lot of pressure, but that's where I think probably all of us and the biggest frustration comes from is just this feeling like this thing matters. And it's like, yeah, you know what? If you've been doing it for 20 years, it's fun to talk about, but that's about it.
I
Yeah, or you can
Oh,
go.
sorry. Go ahead. You're up, Joe. Go ahead.
Um, no, I 100% agree. And I guess for me, like I said, being like knowing all these people, and I've gone through my own like issues, and I'm fine to say it, but like at one point for a short, I think it was a week, I was a coach with barbell medicine, and I was drinking their Kool-Aid to a point where I remember being a gym owner, when I would watch people do certain things, I would start to think in my head like that's wrong or they're not doing it right. And it almost, if I could even pull back even more, like right now when I look at it, and I'm not going to get political, but it almost reminds you of politics, where you have these camps, right, where you can call it kind of cultish, right? And it's like, well, what we look at politics of today, it's just so polarizing, right? And it's just like that's at the end of the day, we're trying to use this to bring people together, and now I just feel like people are getting more pulled apart, and then it's not even a debate, it's just arguments where they're not even listening to other sides of things. um, and you can put any big name figure, whether it's bro science or evidence base, and for me that's kind of where I just start to roll my eyes, and I remember I used to get crap for it because my answer was always it depends, and it would drive people crazy because even for me, like if you look at something, and I'm not trying to get into religion, but when you know somebody who is really religious, I almost am like jealous of how much conviction that they have in a belief in something, where I'm just like, damn, like I wish I felt so like, like all in about something as they do. But I'm starting to see that with these different camps of training philosophies and in, fitness or strength training. But kind of like Alex and you said, Dave, is like it really depends on who the audience is, and that answer is going to change so many times. And if you look at a basic example of, say, foam rolling or whatever type of recovery therapy people like to do, it's just like, yeah, maybe the evidence doesn't support that for what we thought it was, but it's like sometimes just getting on a foam roller feels good, So it's like if I'm going to do it and get on it, or if I'm going to go and do a cold plunge and I like it and whatever, and maybe it's not suggested with certain hours and training window, but it's just like I like doing it. So it's like, hey, I'm not going to tell you you really stop doing that. Don't foam roll. Like there's no evidence to support that. It's really helping. Um, and I've just seen it so much, and equally, like I said, I've been a part of diving into those training philosophies and wholeheartedly starting to believe in them, and then having my mind get completely turned upside down. So now I'm just like, yeah, it depends, man. It depends. There's the right tool for the right job. At the end of the day, if you do something and it feels good and you like it and the evidence doesn't support it, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. Um, and then I think even the other one was with Paul Carter, I think maybe said, I could be wrong, but I think what I read was how um, adding or it's what is it, strength and size, like he was like, where's the research saying that you need to be in a surplus or having extra calories, to get bigger and stronger? And it's like, well, maybe that's true, but at the same time, what am I going to do? Just start telling everybody, no, you don't need to eat more? Like just stop eating more if like you want to get bigger. Like I think there's still a large component that, some people need to add more size to get stronger. Now, is there an extreme degree? Yeah, probably don't want to do that, but I can't justify saying across the board like you don't need to do that, right? Like, and I'm sure, but at the same flip side, there are people that you can recomp and you can train without being a surplus and get stronger, because we all did that probably when we were first starting out. But it's just like it's so contradictive and so polarizing that I'm just like, dude, that's why I kind of just pull away from it, because I'm like, I'm just tired of this shit.
It gets to the point where it's not helpful. Like it should be helpful. And people will point out the contradictions or they'll point out the tribalism. It gets very tribal. And I can be pissed about one of two things, and I'm equally pissed about both. One is giving incorrect, or I would say counterproductive direction to training principles, which I think it's absolutely guilty of. I think it teaches people to treat training incorrectly. Like you said multiple times, it depends. People say it depends because they understand the actual true right answer that's grounded in physical reality depends on a bunch of different confounding variables, probably too many to count. And we're not going off that. We have to go off an odds-based approach off what we see over a population, because we're not all the same model of computer. It's like we're trying to write a script for like an Xbox 360 and like a Mac and like a desktop from, 1970. Like everybody is different, so things behave differently. And it doesn't get talked about to the degree in the evidence-based space because the research and science can't speak on it. It's too complex. That doesn't mean it isn't true. So what people have to understand about training is that it's um it's a discipline. it's an art just as much as it is a science, meaning that we're going off of our ability to find patterns in chaos and try to find what's consequential and pay it forward, which you can actually do very well without having a research paper for every single point that you're trying to make. So we're using crude tools. Lifting is not a surgical tool. It physically cannot be a surgical tool. In whatever science is going to look like in 200 years, they're going to look back and be like, they were doing what with weights to try to do what to their body? It's like, we'll just give you an implant. Boom. Now you're benching 9,000 pounds or whatever. Like, this is a very crude way to exploit some trick of the human body and to act like we know exactly how it works when we don't know exactly how, like, cancer, like we haven't cured cancer. You know what I mean? There's so many facts of human biology that are much more pressing that we haven't gotten to the bottom of. So it just makes you look at the pee-pee jousting that goes on in these tribes. It is marketing. It's people trying to find their hill to set their camp up on, because whether it's clout or whether it's financial, that is how they find success. So the other thing besides the actual training is the corporate slash academic aspect of it. And I don't think that there's any serious scientific discipline where the people engaged in the research are also selling things based on the conclusions that come from the research, where that wouldn't be seen as a conflict of interest and just a hornet's nest of bias. Like that just makes no sense to me that people don't see the conflict. It's Lane Norton with the BCAAs. It's anybody selling anything. Israel has Team Full ROM shirts. Like, how can you be unbiased when literally your income, millions of, you're probably the only exercise scientist to actually make millions of dollars, but it came on the back of promoting your point of view. It becomes very ascientific very quickly. And if I'm going to, and that's not to say, I mean, people think so often they're like, oh, you don't like science. It's like, no, science is one thing. I'm saying this isn't that. There are plenty of guys that do it well and they don't have millions of subs because it's boring to listen to. And when they're honest about it, it's like Eric Helms. This isn't to tell you what to do on a Tuesday. I've listened to Eric. Eric's a smart guy, and he follows, as far as I can tell, the basics of that kind of scientific integrity. Same thing with whether it's Krieger or Schoenfeld or anybody else that people know. Like, we know them, but they're not like superstars in the field, because the second you send that honest message, which is that funding's limited and there's a lot of noise and we don't have statistical power, and oh, it probably doesn't matter depending on the audience anyways, or it depends on things we can't measure, the audience tunes out because they're looking for the shortcut. So you only succeed by telling people that this is the actual shortcut, and that's a big fucking problem. Two guys I like, Data Driven Strength, I really like. There's this they had Knuckles on once, and it was probably the only honest scientific conversation I think I've ever heard, where they were actually getting into the weeds about the things that they do and don't know, and thinking like, well, what would it mean if this was true, or what would we have to know? Hypothesizing, really engaging in the curiosity that comes from that type of scientific investigation, which is nerding out, which most people don't need to know. But it's great because it's honest scientific discussion, and they weren't trying to sell it as something that's going to give you some marginal growth that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten, because that's when it becomes fraudulent.
I'm really glad you added that last part there about like you're not anti-science, because anybody listening to this podcast consistently knows, I am into the science, and just in general, not with lifting. I was just listening to a podcast unrelated with dental the other day, and I was looking at this procedure, and one of the procedures we do is called socket preservation. I was looking at grafted material that we put in there, and to look at which material I wanted to buy, I was looking at different studies, which of course is going to have its own bias as well. But the point is, like, I enjoy the process of science, and I like that idea. But like you said, Eric Helms with like the mass, monthly applications in strength sport, and I listen to almost all of their audios that they put out. And to your point, though, for some people, it can be kind of boring because most of the conclusions are kind of like, okay, this is how the study was run, and this is one piece of evidence on this whole body of evidence. And generally, the conclusion is like, it doesn't really change much of what we're doing. So it is a little boring for some people. But that kind of is the process. And I appreciate the honesty. So I just don't want people listening to be like, we're like, no, anti-science, science is BS. It's like you said, that's just not what a lot of the supposed purveyors of science in the industry are actually doing.
Well, I want to point out too, because I think Joe hit the nail on the head when he said it seems like it has that politicized sheen to it. Because in dealing with this discussion, I mean, I get flashbacks from COVID. It doesn't matter what side you're on. You had two noisy sides, again, that does what social media does. People get polarized, they get led by the extremes, and you had the all in, this is the science, follow the science. If something comes out in a research paper, if an authority is saying it, you just do that. I'm not saying everybody did that, but that existed. And on the other side, you had people that were convinced that any appeal to science was some part of some new religion, and that everybody was just a sheep and think for yourself, like they were going to somehow invent all of the most rational, numerically sound heuristics from scratch. That couldn't possibly be. So you get a lot of irrationality on both sides that just foments and makes it worse. And I mean, I don't know if the comments are representative of anything real in the world, but for the battles I've had in the comments, because I do be in there throwing grenades, it seems like there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of people with very strong opinions, but they're not representing it right. It's like the really important aspect of the argument kind of gets lost, and it leads you to ask, okay, why do we have this dysfunctional dialogue going on? Why does it feel politicized?
Any final thoughts there, Joey?
No, I totally agree. Like I'm definitely a fan of science, so I just wanted to say that. But I do think there's just, like you said, these just big camps that are pushing so much of what people are, believing and not questioning. And, I think there's got to be that middle ground essentially, or just asking more questions, right? Like when people come up to me and ask me stuff, I try to take that Socratic approach, just asking them questions back. What do you think about that? Well, if that's true, then what does this mean? And kind of just trying to spark them to have more of critical thinking patterns, because I think at the end of the day, it's just easier to hear something from somebody who is on a pedestal and take it, 100% for word, because it's lack of effort on my end, right? Like it's easy for me to just Google the question, get an answer. Well, everybody that says that answer just believes that's the truth, when it's like we didn't even go any further than right there. And it is so nuanced. So that's all I would say is for anybody listening to this is understand, who is this person? What is their background? Where are they coming from? Do they have a business, or, they're part of a corporation? Looking in more deeply into studies if you're into that thing, and, kind of getting to the root of it, and having an open mind, right? It's so cliche, but just have an open mind, and realize that there's so many different ways to do different things. And I always just think being dogmatic is just not the way to go about a lot of things, but
Sure.
to each his own.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, it's the dogma. It's a search for precision when the real answer is that you don't have precision. So let's reframe the way you think about this problem. And once people understand that, they'll get less irked, or actually you'll get less disturbed by any of the discussion that goes on, because you'll see the arguments as being kind of silly on the face of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I just think also it's rare. I would say some people do a good job of it, but it's rare to find big names dismiss the things that maybe they were wrong about, or when the science changes. And it's like you'll see it in the comment section and it's kind of disregarded, because that just shows that they are so deeply rooted in, I don't want to say their agenda, but just what they're trying to push. Um, when all you'd have to do is just say, hey, because it's science, it's going to change. You could say this one thing based right now, but in 5 years, it could be completely different. So I would appreciate maybe more transparency, and not so much of, like you said, just like a dick battle between some of the top people trying to prove their points against one another, when the majority of the audience, it's not very applicable to.
Sure. Yep. Good stuff, guys. Yeah, no, I thought that was great. So, last topic here, unrelated to lifting. We'll see if it's a flop or if it goes anywhere. So, Joey, I actually did not know this until we spoke on DMs maybe like a year or so ago. So, am I correct that you said that maybe until recently you and your brother had gone to see every Marvel movie in theaters?
We had up until probably when we had that discussion. So I haven't
Okay.
seen it has gotten so deeper and just, yeah, deeper than I can handle right now.
Okay.
So
Especially with a
I would
kid,
say
yeah.
probably up to, I don't know, the last couple of years we used to go. It was our thing. We'd go and watch every Marvel movie.
Okay. And I know Alex, you and I have discussed it, and you're actually just kind of like a general film critic, which I can appreciate. So I that's what the final topic was just going to be, just a little bit on Marvel. Alex, I don't know if you are up to date at all. I was going to say with the caveat, this conversation is no spoilers. I hate spoilers. I don't even watch trailers. I was in New York City, and they had a trailer going that it was in Times Square, you couldn't avoid it. So I had some spoilers there. But in general, I've seen everything up to this point now. So I was just curious, maybe I guess Alex, you're a little bit more up to date. Have you seen anything more recently?
Yeah, so I was faithful all the way up until the end of, like, all the way up until Endgame, where they put a big bow on it.
Yep.
And then
Yeah.
everything after that, I'm just happy Endgame was kind of spared because people talk
Yeah.
about the flaws, but I'm like it hit the beats for me in a lot of different ways. And then it just started circling the drain after that. Um, so after wasting time with like WandaVision and Loki,
Yeah.
I just like checked out. I think I hate watched Captain Marvel just to
Okay.
see, but me and my wife walked out of Multiverse of Madness,
Oh, really?
and then yeah, oh yeah, and then that was about it. And then I put a bad taste in my mouth. So sometimes I'll watch like the YouTube stuff that just rehashes the same stuff. It's all going downhill, and it's like it is
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
But I just don't engage with it. I am caught up on Daredevil, and I've been doing reviews. I have like a second channel where occasionally when something, it's all negative. When something pisses me off, I just make a video. It's very cathartic for me to just dump my thoughts in. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, I am caught up on Daredevil, and I know a little bit about what the next phase coming out is, but I can't imagine any universe where I go and
Go
waste
back
money on
into it.
any of it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like Joey, we had always gone to see everything in theaters up until pretty much the same point as you, up until maybe I think The Marvels was the first movie I did not go to see in theaters.
That's where I stopped.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty
And
much
I
the
know
same.
the shows just got too overwhelming for
Too
me. And
much.
then
Dude.
I knew that they were just opening up a whole other can of worms that probably just should have just ended at Endgame, like Alex has said. And I was like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny because like when I was a kid, I remember you'd see the the nerdy like 30 and 40-year-olds who were still into Star Wars, right? And like the classic Star Wars. And I'd think like, who is that person? But now that is kind of what's happened with Marvel. It's been around since what 2008, so a very long time now. And I think almost anything that's profitable, you kind of just can't let die. And so, like you said, they have these shows. My friends used to be into it, and they would be like, "Yeah, like I have to watch to even understand this one movie. I have to be caught up on like three different series. It's almost impossible."
But actually, you really don't, which is part of the problem. Because I mean, there's a problem of whether or not they're good, but also they tried to do, with the cinematic universe, they tried to do like the George R. R. Martin, like epic, grand, just 100 storylines, and they're all good, but they're also all integrally tied into each other, and nobody knew what each other was
They
doing.
tried
I
to
mean,
do that, but maybe not.
oh my, yeah, there's so much contradiction and things that just make whatever happened before our own. And anyways, and then you're like, oh, but this, I mean, the most egregious thing, oh, this just sucks. Like this is a low effort. The acting's bad, the writing's bad. I mean, you can stay away from the culture war stuff and still look at, oh, this just wasn't a good time. And that's
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of where I'm at.
Yeah. The last thing that I saw that kind of just made me roll my eyes was just having Robert Downey Jr. back as Doctor
yeah, yeah,
Doom.
yeah,
And I'm just like, come on, dude. Like
Yeah.
what is
because
happening? Even like
yeah,
it's still like in Marvel, like I get it. Maybe if you went to like DC, like I probably wouldn't have even actually been that upset about it because I was
of
like, at
course.
least it's separated. Um, but it's like yeah, we whatever. I'm not gonna give any spoilers or anything, but at the same time, I'm like, come on, dog.
Yeah, yeah, they did that with Chris Evans, but it was a different, he was fantastic for Johnny Flame, but then it was a different universe. But yeah, this is the same one. Um, but actually, somebody just told me the other day, my sister's like a huge Harry Potter fan, and I actually almost had respect for the fact that like it ended and then it was just kind of done for the most part. And I guess the author never let more happen. But I heard that they're actually just starting a series now on
Oh,
HBO or
yeah,
whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like if
the
anything,
money.
you just can't let it die. And it's just like to your point, I was excited when after Endgame things continued, and now I think back and I'm like, that really just would have been a great time to just end it. Just end
Yeah.
it as this perfect 10 years, and that's it. But
Well, it seems like they're doing even with like Game of Thrones. They have all
right,
like these other side shows. They're making video games now. I was
are
like,
they?
am I watching a freaking Game of Thrones video game? Like, which I guess they did the same thing similar in Lord of the Rings. And it's just like, yeah, if
Oh
there's
yeah,
money to be made, they're gonna try to just milk that cow,
gotta do it.
as much as they can. But I don't know if you guys watch The Last of Us, but that's off of the
Yeah.
video game. But I'm like, I just hope after this, like it's done. Like if you end it there, like it's great. You know what I mean? Like people may want more, but you have to know when to keep them at that level and just
Yeah,
let something die out, than try to extend it any longer.
yeah, yeah,
Well, it's hard when it's hard because every generation or so, it's like, okay, a reboot kind of makes sense. If I look back to my childhood, I mean, most of the things that we think were peak 90s were also based off stuff from a few decades before. So that kind of happens. But we're used to this idea that, like, well, technology increases and then our storytelling gets better. It's got more modern over the years. And you look at the campy shit from the 60s, and you're like, well, I'm happy they kind of had Batman the animated series in the 90s. It was more adult, mature. But then as they keep doing it, there's no forward trajectory. It's just kind of mutating and turning into these different unrecognizable things that aren't really for anybody. And then when you add that, like, animated stuff makes me so angry because the animation has been such dog shit for like the last 30, ever since they changed Batman the animated series. They switched studios in like season 3 or 4, and it had those hard straight lines. They took away a lot of the detail out of the grit. Then that's what like every Justice League cartoon looked like. That's what, like, everything since is just flat and soulless and like factory mass produced. And it's just indicative of everything else. It's not getting better. So it's like I'm happy to see a reboot if it has something to offer. Every now and then you get surprised. I remember when Christopher Nolan's Batman movies came out. I'm like, these are gonna be fucking stupid. And then I'm like, oh my God, they actually did something good. I mean, I even kind of like the Robert Pattinson Batman. So every now and then it's like they'll get it right. But yeah, you just get to see if they'll turn shit out, throw it at the wall because they're trying to milk the properties dry. And then, like, tangentially, Disney, it's like the big corporate overlord that's trying to
Yeah,
Yeah.
renew their IPs.
oh yeah,
And it's like I can't help but follow like the Snow White drama. Why am I
yeah.
keeping
I
track of
saw that.
the Snow White
Right.
remake that shouldn't concern me? I can't help myself, but it's just the prime example of they're just squeezing it dry. And I love watching the downward trend. We're looking at like what the Lion King brought in and the remake of Beauty and the Beast. And I don't even think anybody sees those as especially good or classics, but they were bringing in like 240, 220 million their opening weekend. And I think Snow White's projected for like 45.
Yeah.
And you look at it, it's like, good bleed. I hope this bleeds you dry.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to check out your other channel, Alex. I like Grumpy Alex for these these type of things. I gotta check it out.
It's the only kind. It's the only kind there is.
Cool guys. So we'll start with you, Alex. Other than the Grumpy channel, where can people find your content?
It's my main YouTube channel, Alexander Bromley. It's pretty easy to find. Instagram, I post once every 2 months. What is my Instagram now? I don't even remember what my Instagram handle is. I changed
Like,
it recently.
oh,
I think I changed it to Braun Swanson.
oh yeah.
Um, uh, yeah, and that's about it. And then if anybody wants to reach out to me, usually Instagram is probably the easiest way to do it.
Cool, cool. What are you, Joey?
Yeah, primarily I probably just post on Instagram the most now. It's just Zat Strength, SZAT, the word strength. I got my website, zatstrength.net. I do have a YouTube channel, but I've been just focusing on more in-person stuff. We'll get back to the YouTube at some point, but for right now, it's just been more in-person career focused. But yeah, I'm private on Instagram, which is funny. So, it shows how much I truly care about
Right.
that at this
Social media.
moment. But yeah,
Your
you
mental health
guys,
is better for it.
yeah, 100%. 100%.
Cool, cool guys. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for
Absolutely.
having us, man. This is a
Thank
lot
you.
of fun.